I signed that prenup with tears streaming down my face, thinking I was protecting the man I loved from my supposedly broke family. His mother watched me sign it with a satisfied smile that would haunt me for months. But when my father's lawyer called about my inheritance 3 months later, that smile disappeared forever. Love is blind, they say. What I learned is that sometimes it's not love that's blind, it's us. My name is Tiana, and this is the story of how a single piece of paper changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and my worth. 2 years ago, I was 28 and teaching 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary. The pay wasn't amazing, but I loved watching a child's face light up when they finally grasped a difficult concept or read their first complete sentence. That kind of fulfillment felt like true wealth until I met James. I was grading papers at my usual Tuesday spot in the coffee shop on 5th Street when laughter from the next table caught my attention. Not just a chuckle, but genuine, infectious laughter that made me look up from my red pen and stack of spelling tests. A man in an impeccably tailored suit was reading something on his phone, shaking his head with a smile that drew me in completely. "Sorry," he said, noticing me staring. "My buddy just sent me the worst dad joke known to mankind." He had warm brown eyes and wore a suit that probably costs more than my monthly rent. "James," he said, extending his hand. "Tiana," I replied, and that was it. We talked for 2 hours straight. James was an investment banker at a prestigious downtown firm, but he didn't carry himself with the arrogance I expected. He asked about my students, laughed at my classroom stories, and seemed genuinely interested in my world. For the next 6 months, we were inseparable. He'd pick me up after school, bring coffee during my lunch breaks, and spend weekends helping me decorate my classroom, rolling up his expensive sleeves to hang student artwork like it belonged in the Metropolitan Museum. I was falling hard, and I thought he was too. Then I met his family, and everything changed. The first dinner at their house was like stepping into another universe. Their massive colonial home in the suburbs featured marble floors and crystal chandeliers that caught the light like diamonds. James's mother, Patricia, was a retired judge who carried herself like she was still presiding over a courtroom. His father, William, was quieter but equally polished. They had money, real money, and they wanted everyone to know it. Patricia greeted me with one of those smiles that never reaches the eyes. "So, you're the teacher James has been telling us about," she said, making teacher sound like a dirty word. Throughout dinner, she peppered the conversation with subtle barbs. "Teaching must be so rewarding spiritually," she'd say with barely concealed condescension. "I imagine the hours are nice, even if the pay isn't." William was kinder, asking about my students and nodding politely, but I could see him glancing at his wife, reading her cues. James defended me when things got too obvious, but I could tell he didn't see the full picture. He'd grown up in this world where subtle prejudice was dressed up as concern, and classism was disguised as practical thinking, but I loved him, so I kept trying. I brought homemade cookies, remembered their birthdays, and bit my tongue when Patricia made comments about my modest background. I told myself that love would be enough, that they'd eventually see who I was. Then James proposed. It happened on a Saturday morning in the park where we'd had our first official date. He got down on one knee with a beautiful ring, and I cried happy tears. For about 30 seconds, I thought I was living in a fairy tale. Then we went to tell his parents. Patricia's first words were, "Well, I suppose we'll need to discuss a pre..." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, like it was as natural as planning a wedding menu, made my stomach drop. James looked uncomfortable but didn't argue. "Mom, can we at least celebrate first?" he asked, but I could see he wasn't going to fight her on this. That night, Patricia called me directly. "Tiana dear, I hope you understand this isn't personal. It's just that James has worked so hard to build his career, and with your ... situation, well, we need to protect what he's built." My situation code for being black, working class, and not from their world. The prenup was brutal. I wouldn't have any claim to his assets, no matter how long we were married. If we divorced, I'd get minimal alimony for only 2 years. If he died, I'd get a small life insurance payout, but nothing from his estate. And here's the kicker: if I ever embarrassed the family or damaged their reputation, I'd get nothing at all. James sat there while his mother's lawyer explained each clause, occasionally wincing but never objecting. "It's just a formality, babe," he whispered to me. "It doesn't mean anything, but it meant everything. It meant they saw me as a threat, a gold digger, someone who couldn't possibly love their son for who he was. It meant that in their eyes, I was exactly what they expected, a poor black woman looking for a come-up. I signed it anyway. I signed it. I loved him because I wanted to prove I wasn't what they thought I was, and because some part of me believed I deserved their suspicion. I signed it with tears streaming down my face while Patricia watched with that satisfied smile, like she'd won some kind of game I didn't even know we were playing. 3 months later, everything changed. My father, Robert, had raised me alone since I was 5. My mother died in a car accident, and it was just me and him in our little apartment on the south side. He worked long hours at what I thought was some boring office job, but he never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. He taught me to be strong, to work hard, and to never let anyone make me feel small because of where I came from. Dad was my hero, my best friend, and my biggest supporter. So when he collapsed at work with a massive heart attack, my world stopped. I spent 3 days in that hospital, holding his hand and praying. James was there with me, bringing me food and coffee, rubbing my back when I cried. For a moment, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with him. On the 3rd day, Dad squeezed my hand and whispered, "Baby girl, when this is over, you need to go to the bank. Safety deposit box. Everything you need to know is in there." He died 2 hours later, a week after the funeral. I got a call from a lawyer named Mr. Thompson. He said he'd been my father's attorney for over 20 years and needed to meet with me about the estate. I almost laughed. What estate? Dad drove a 15-year-old Honda and lived in a rental apartment, but I went to his office anyway, and he handed me a key. "Your father left specific instructions," he said. "You're to open the safety deposit box alone. Read everything inside, and then we'll talk." The bank was downtown, one of those old imposing buildings with marble columns. The safety deposit box was larger than I'd expected, and when I opened it, my hands started shaking. Inside were documents, photographs, and letters. The first thing I saw was a newspaper clipping from 1995. Local tech entrepreneur sells startup for $2.8 billion. The photo showed a younger version of my father, shaking hands with executives. I stared at it, convinced it was a mistake. But then I found more articles, stock certificates, bank statements, investment portfolios, photos of my father at charity galas, business meetings, and conferences. Pictures of him with people I recognized from Forbes, covers, and Wall Street. Journal articles. My father, my quiet, humble father who drove an old Honda and lived in a tiny apartment, was worth almost $3 billion. The letters explained everything. Dad had started a tech company in the early 90s that developed software for financial institutions. When he sold it in 1995, he became one of the youngest black billionaires in America. But he'd made a conscious choice to live modestly, to give me a normal childhood free from the complications that came with that kind of wealth. "I wanted you to know your worth had nothing to do with money," he'd written in a letter dated just months before his death. "I wanted you to be strong, independent, and grounded in who you are, not what you have. But now you're old enough to handle this responsibility. Use it wisely, baby girl. Use it to make a difference." I sat in that bank vault for 2 hours, reading every document, looking at every photo. My father had been secretly funding scholarships, supporting educational programs, and donating to causes he believed in. He'd built a fortune and then spent his life giving it away, all while making sure I never felt different or special because of money. When I finally met with Mr. Thompson, he explained that I'd inherited everything: the liquid assets, the real estate, the investment portfolios. After taxes and charitable commitments Dad had already made, I was looking at an inheritance of just over $2 billion. $2 billion? I thought about that prenup sitting in James's family safe. About Patricia's satisfied smile. About all the times they'd made me feel small and grateful just to be included in their world. I thought about the modest background comments and the way they'd treated me like a charity case. And then I started to laugh. That night, I sat James down and told him everything. He was shocked, then hurt that I hadn't told him sooner. "Why didn't you say anything?" he kept asking. "Why did you let me? Why did you let my mother?" "Because I wanted to see who you were," I said. "I wanted to know if you'd stand up for me when you thought I had nothing." He got quiet then, and I could see him thinking back to all those dinners. All those little comments his mother had made, all the times he'd chosen keeping peace over defending me. The next family dinner was interesting. I didn't announce my inheritance outright. I just dropped hints, mentioned that I'd be taking some time off from teaching to handle some family business. Said something about discovering some family assets and needing to meet with financial advisors. Patricia was dismissive as usual. "Oh, how nice. I'm sure it's wonderful to have a little something put aside." She patted my hand like I was a child who'd found a $20 bill. That's when I pulled out the bank statements. The silence was deafening. Patricia's face went completely white. William choked on his wine. James just stared at the numbers, his mouth hanging open. "I'm sorry," Patricia stammered, "but there must be some mistake. These numbers can't be right." "Oh, they're right," I said calmly. "My father was Robert Johnson, founder of SecureFlow Technologies. Maybe you've heard of it." William's eyes went wide. "You're Robert Johnson's daughter." "The Robert Johnson." "The very same," I said, enjoying every second of their shock. "The same man whose background you found so modest." What happened next was almost comical. Patricia immediately started backtracking, suddenly finding reasons to praise my father's business acumen and my strong family values. William began asking detailed questions about Dad's company, like we were old friends. Even James's sister, who barely spoke to me before, started texting about getting together for lunch. But the person I was most interested in watching was James. He wasn't celebrating or proud. He was embarrassed. Embarrassed that he'd let me sign that prenup. Embarrassed that his family had treated me poorly. But mostly, he was embarrassed that his girlfriend was now worth more than his entire family combined. Why didn't you tell me? He kept asking. We could have avoided all of this. Could we? I asked. Would you have loved me any differently? Would your mother have treated me with respect? Or would you have just found new ways to make me feel like I didn't belong? He couldn't answer that, and we both knew why. The relationship limped along for another month, but it was over. James couldn't handle the role reversal. He couldn't handle that I no longer needed him or his family's approval. He'd fallen in love with the idea of being my savior, of lifting me to his level. Now that I was above his level, he didn't know how to relate to me. Patricia kept trying to rebuild our relationship, inviting me to charity events and family gatherings. But I'd seen her true colors, and no amount of money was going to erase that. She didn't respect me, she just respected my bank account. The final straw came when James suggested we tear up the prenup and start over. We can work this out, he said. We love each other, do we? I asked. Because the man I loved would have never let me sign that prenup in the first place. The man I loved would have stood up to his mother instead of letting her treat me like a threat. The man I loved would have seen my worth before he knew my net worth. I gave him back the ring and kept the prenup. Not because I was bitter, but because I wanted to remember the lesson it taught me. Never let anyone make you feel small. Because of where you come from, never settle for someone who won't defend you when you can't defend yourself. And never, ever let anyone treat you as less than you are. A year later, I established the Robert Johnson Foundation, focusing on education and opportunities for underserved communities. I still teach, though now I teach at a school I built. I've met someone new, a man who knew nothing about my money when he fell in love with my laugh in a grocery store checkout line. He's a social worker who makes a fraction of what I have, but he sees me, values me, and would fight the world for me if he had to. My father's gift wasn't just the money. It was the lesson that true wealth comes from knowing your worth has nothing to do with your wallet. Patricia's prenup was supposed to protect her son from me, but it ended up protecting me from a family that could never see my value. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is show you exactly who they are. That prenup was the most expensive education I never knew I needed, and it was worth every penny. I didn't have to pay for it. The most valuable lesson of my life was written in legal language on expensive paper. Never let anyone make you feel it's small because of where you come from. My father hid his wealth to teach me humility, but I learned that self-worth isn't about money, it's about knowing your value, and that knowledge, it's priceless.